The Blood of April, The 12-Day Chase. Prologue. The Dream. April 11th, 1865. The White House. The war was over. The bloodiest conflict in American history, which had turned the fields of Gettysburg and Antietam into open-air slaughterhouses, had finally ceased. Robert E. Lee had surrendered at Appomattox just 2 days prior. The Union was saved. But Abraham Lincoln could not sleep. The 16th President of the United States wandered the drafty hallways of the White House in his nightshirt. He was a man physically and spiritually hollowed out by 4 years of death. His face was a road map of grief. His cheeks were sunken, his eyes dark pools of exhaustion. He found his way to the East Room. In the darkness he saw a catafalque, a raised platform used for coffins. Around it, soldiers stood guard, their faces obscured by shadow. A crowd of mourners was weeping. In his dream, Lincoln approached a soldier. "Who is dead in the White House?" the president asked. "The president," the soldier replied. "He was killed by an assassin." Lincoln woke up with a start. The room was silent. He told his wife, Mary Todd, and his cabinet members about the dream the next morning. "It is only a dream, surely," Mary said, terrified. "Yes." Lincoln sighed, his voice raspy. But it was so strangely real. He didn't know that across town, in a high-end hotel room, a famous actor was drinking brandy and staring at a pistol, deciding that dreams were not enough. Chapter 1. The Celebrity. April 14th, 1865. Noon. Washington, D.C. was drunk. Not just on alcohol, though there was plenty of that flowing in the saloons along Pennsylvania Avenue, but drunk on victory. The city was draped in bunting, flags hung from every window, cannons boomed in celebration every hour. The Confederate capital of Richmond had fallen, the Union had survived. Walking through this jubilant chaos was a man who looked like he had stepped out of a fashion magazine. He wore a silk hat, a velvet-collared coat, and tall riding boots. He was strikingly handsome, with jet-black hair and a mustache that curled perfectly at the ends. Women stopped on the street to stare at him. Men tipped their hats. "That's John Wilkes Booth," they whispered. To understand the tragedy, one must understand the villain. John Wilkes Booth was not a shadowy, unknown creep. He was famous. In 1865 terms, he was Brad Pitt or Tom Cruise. He was a heartthrob stage actor, earning $20,000 a year, an astronomical sum then, touring the country performing Shakespeare. He was known for his athleticism on stage, his sword fights, and his brooding intensity. But beneath the makeup and the applause, Booth was a radical. He was a Marylander who believed slavery was a blessing from God. He hated Lincoln with a biblical fury. He saw Lincoln not as a savior, but as an American Caesar, a tyrant who had destroyed the Constitution to free the slaves. Booth walked to Ford's Theater on 10th Street. He wasn't there to act. He was there to pick up his mail. As he leaned against the counter, he heard a stagehand say the magic words, "The President is coming tonight. General Grant might be with him." Booth's heart hammered against his ribs. He knew Ford's Theater better than his own home. He knew every door, every hallway, every loose floorboard. He knew the play that would be performed that night, Our American Cousin, a silly British comedy. He checked his pocket watch. It was noon. He had 8 hours to change history. Chapter 2. The Conspiracy. Booth did not act alone. In the back room of a boarding house owned by Mary Surratt, A motley crew of losers and fanatics had gathered. Booth sat at the head of the table. He laid out the map. This was not just a murder, it was a decapitation strike. Booth intended to destroy the entire United States government in a single night. The plan was threefold. John Wilkes Booth would kill President Abraham Lincoln at Ford's Theater. Lewis Powell, a hulking, brain-damaged Confederate veteran who was as strong as an ox, would kill Secretary of State William Seward. George Atzerodt, a carriage painter with a drinking problem and a weak chin, would kill Vice President Andrew Johnson at the Kirkwood Hotel. If they succeeded, the Union would have no leader. The chain of succession would be broken, chaos would reign, and perhaps, just perhaps, the South could rise from the ashes. "Tonight," Booth whispered, his eyes burning. He gave Lewis Powell a heavy revolver and a knife. He gave Atzerodt a gun and a map to the vice president's room. Atzerodt looked sick. "I signed up for kidnapping, John," he stammered, "not murder. I can't kill a man." Booth leaned in, his actor's voice dropping to a terrifying growl. "You are too deep, George. If you back out now, I will shoot you myself." Chapter 3. The State Box. 8:30 p.m. The Lincoln carriage clattered over the cobblestones. Inside sat the President and Mary Todd Lincoln. They were late. General Grant had declined the invitation. His wife despised Mary Lincoln and refused to spend an evening with her. Instead, the Lincolns brought a young couple, Major Henry Rathbone and his fiancée, Clara Harris. Lincoln was tired. He had told his cabinet earlier that day that he wanted to be lenient on the rebels. No persecution, no bloody work, he had said. He wanted peace. The carriage pulled up to Ford's Theater. The play had already started. As the president entered the lobby, the orchestra leader topped his baton. The music stopped. Then the band struck up "Hail to the Chief." The 1,700 people in the audience rose to their feet. They cheered. They waved handkerchiefs. The actors on stage stopped performing and bowed. Lincoln smiled, a rare, genuine smile. He bowed to the crowd and led his party up the winding stairs to the dress circle and into the State Box. The box was decorated with American flags. A red-cushioned rocking chair had been placed there specifically for Lincoln. He sat down, Mary to his right. Major Rathbone and Clara Harris sat on a sofa to the left. The play resumed. The audience laughed. Lincoln relaxed. He reached out and held Mary's hand. "What will Miss Harris think of my hanging on to you so?" Mary whispered, teasing him. "She won't think anything about it," Lincoln replied. Those were the last words Abraham Lincoln ever spoke. Chapter 4. The Barred Door. 10 p.m. John Wilkes Booth entered the theater lobby. He was dressed in black. He had had a drink at the Star Saloon next door to steady his nerves. He walked up the stairs to the dress circle. He moved like a ghost. There should have been a guard at the door to the president's box. A man named John Parker was assigned the duty, but Parker was incompetent. He had gotten bored and wandered off to the saloon to get a drink. The door was unguarded. Booth slipped into the small vestibule that separated the hallway from the box. He closed the door behind him. In the darkness, he picked up a wooden board he had hidden there earlier that day. He wedged it between the door and the wall, barring it from the inside. No one could get in to stop him. No one could get in to help. He stood in the darkness, breathing slowly. Through a small peephole he had carved into the inner door, he could see the back of Lincoln's head. He waited. He knew the play by heart. He was waiting for a specific line, a line that was guaranteed to get a massive laugh. The laughter would cover the sound of the gunshot. On stage, Harry Hawk was delivering a monologue. Booth drew his weapon. It was a .44 caliber Derringer pistol. It was a single-shot weapon. He had one chance. If he missed, he would have to use his knife. On stage, Harry Hawk shouted, "Don't know the manners of good society, eh? Well, I guess I know enough to turn you inside out, old gal, you socked-a-lodging old man-trap." The audience roared with laughter. Booth opened the door. Chapter 5. Sic Semper Tyrannis. 10:15 p.m. He stepped forward. He placed the barrel of the pistol just inches behind Lincoln's left ear. He pulled the trigger. Crack! The sound was muffled by the laughter, but the smoke was instant. Lincoln's head slumped forward. He didn't scream. He didn't move. The bullet had entered behind his left ear, plowed diagonally through his brain, and lodged behind his right eye. Mary Lincoln didn't realize what had happened. She thought it was part of the play. But Major Rathbone knew. He spun around and saw Booth standing in the smoke, a dagger in his hand. Rathbone lunged. Booth dropped the pistol and slashed with the knife. The blade tore through Rathbone's arm, slicing an artery. Blood sprayed over the box. "Sic Semper Tyrannis," Booth screamed. Thus always to tyrants. He scrambled to the railing of the box. It was a 12-foot drop to the stage below. Booth vaulted over, but as he jumped, his spur caught on the Treasury flag draping the box. He landed awkwardly on the stage. Snap! His left fibula broke just above the ankle. He stumbled, then stood up. The audience was silent. They thought this was part of the show. Why was John Wilkes Booth on stage? Booth brandished his bloody knife at the audience. "The South is avenged!" he shouted. He ran across the stage, limping badly. He exited through the back door into the alleyway. Behind him, a scream pierced the air. It was a sound so raw and terrifying that it froze the blood of everyone in the theater. It was Mary Lincoln. "He has killed the President! He has killed the President!" Chapter 6. The Night of Blood. While Booth was fleeing into the Maryland night on a rented horse, the other parts of the conspiracy were in motion. At the Kirkwood Hotel, George Atzerodt sat in the hotel bar. He had a gun in his pocket. Vice President Andrew Johnson was sleeping in a room upstairs. Atzerodt ordered a drink, then another, then another. He looked at the stairs. He thought about the hanging rope. He thought about murder. His nerve failed him. He tossed the gun under a bed and ran out into the night, disappearing into the city. The vice president was safe. At the Seward house, Lewis Powell was not so cowardly. He arrived at the home of Secretary of State William Seward. Seward was bedridden, recovering from a terrible carriage accident. His jaw was wired shut. Powell rang the doorbell. He told the servant he had medicine from the doctor. When the servant refused to let him up, Powell tried to shoot him, but his gun jammed. He bludgeoned the servant with the heavy pistol, cracking his skull. Powell bounded up the stairs like a demon. Seward's son, Frederick, tried to stop him. Powell beat him into a coma with the broken gun. He burst into the bedroom. He pulled a Bowie knife. He jumped onto the bed where the Secretary of State lay helpless. He began to stab wildly. He slashed Seward's face, his throat, his cheek. The metal splint on Seward's broken jaw saved his life. It deflected the blade from the jugular vein. Seward rolled off the bed, covered in blood. Powell, thinking he had killed him, fought his way out of the house, stabbing a soldier and another son on his way out. He ran into the night squealing, "I am mad! I am mad!" Chapter 7. The long night. Washington descended into madness. The telegraph lines hummed with the news. Lincoln shot, Seward stabbed, the government is under attack. Soldiers flooded the streets. They set up blockades at every bridge leading out of the city. Except one bridge, the Navy Yard Bridge. At 10:45 p.m., a lone rider approached the sentry at the Navy Yard Bridge. The sergeant held up a lantern. "Who are you?" the sergeant asked. "My name is Booth. I am going home to Charles County." "You know no one is allowed out after 9, the sergeant said. Booth flashed his famous smile, though he was in agony from his broken leg. "I didn't know the rule. I've been in the city on business." The sergeant looked at the handsome face. He recognized him, an actor, a gentleman. "Go ahead," the sergeant said. He let the assassin cross the river. 10 minutes later, another rider approached. It was David Harold, one of Booth's conspirators. He also talked his way past the guard. 15 minutes after that, the pursuit cavalry arrived. The sergeant, realizing his mistake, told them he had let 2 men pass. The chase was on. Chapter 8. The Death Watch. April 15th, 1865, 7:22 a.m. Abraham Lincoln was too tall for the bed. They had carried him across the street from the theater to the Peterson House, a small boarding house. They laid him diagonally across a cheap corn husk mattress. The room was crowded with doctors, generals, and cabinet members. The air smelled of blood and mustard plasters. Lincoln never regained consciousness. His breathing grew ragged, then it became shallow. At 7:22 a.m., his chest heaved one last time. Then it settled. Dr. Barnes placed a hand on his chest. He checked his watch. He nodded to Secretary of War Edwin Stanton. Stanton, the iron-willed man who had run the war, had tears streaming down his face into his beard. He looked at the peaceful face of the man who had saved the Union. "Now he belongs to the ages," Stanton whispered. The president was dead, but the assassin was alive. Chapter 9. The Doctor in the Dark. April 15th, 1865, 4 a.m., Southern Maryland. The pain in Booth's leg was excruciating. Every gallop of the horse sent a spike of agony up his shin. The bone was snapping against the muscle. He needed help. He and David Harold, his accomplice, rode up the long driveway of a farmhouse near Bryantown. They pounded on the door. Dr. Samuel Mudd opened it. He was a country doctor and a Confederate sympathizer. He had met Booth before. Booth had visited the area months ago looking to buy land, or so he said. "Who was there?" Mudd asked. "Strangers," Harold lied. "My friend fell off his horse. His leg is broken." Mudd let them in. He helped carry Booth to a sofa in the parlor. He didn't ask too many questions. In southern Maryland, you didn't ask questions of men riding at night. Mudd examined the leg. It was a clean fracture of the fibula. He took a knife and cut the tall riding boot off Booth's swollen leg. He fashioned a splint out of wood and pasteboard. Booth gave the name Tyler. He kept his face partially covered with a shawl. He was exhausted, pale, and shivering. Mudd gave them a room upstairs. As the sun rose, Booth slept, unaware that just 30 miles away, the news of the assassination was spreading like a wildfire. Did Mudd know? It is the great debate of history. Mudd later claimed he didn't recognize the famous actor in the dim light. But Booth had shaved his mustache that morning in Mudd's house. And when Mudd went into town later that day to buy supplies, he heard the news: Lincoln is dead. Booth is the killer. When Mudd returned home, he was terrified. He ordered the men to leave. He pointed them toward a swamp. He said, "Go, before the soldiers come." Mudd had saved Booth's leg, but he had doomed himself. For giving aid to the assassin, Dr. Mudd would be sentenced to a prison island in the dry Tortugas. His name would become synonymous with disgrace. Hence the phrase, "His name is Mudd." Chapter 10. The Iron Man. April 16, 1865, Washington, D.C. Edwin Stanton, the Secretary of War, was now the de facto ruler of the United States. With Lincoln dead and Vice President Johnson in shock, Stanton took control. He turned the War Department into a command center. He mobilized the entire Union Army. "I want every bridge watched. I want every road patrolled doubled. I want every boat on the Potomac stopped and searched." He issued a reward poster. It was massive, $100,000, equivalent to over $1.5 million today. The murderer of our late beloved President, Abraham Lincoln, is still at large. Stanton was a paranoid man. He believed the assassination was a grand Confederate conspiracy ordered by Jefferson Davis himself. He arrested hundreds of people. Anyone who had ever looked at Booth was thrown in the old Capitol prison. He sent the best detectives in the country, the National Detective Police, or NDP, into Maryland. Leading the hunt was Lafayette Baker, a ruthless spy master who operated outside the law. They found the trail quickly. They found the stableman who rented Booth the horse. They found the guard at the Navy Yard Bridge who let him pass. He went to Surrattsville, they said. Then he went south. The Union cavalry, the 16th New York, thundered into Maryland. They were moving fast. They were angry. If they caught Booth, there would likely be no trial. They would tear him apart. Chapter 11. The Pine Thicket. April 16th to 20th. Booth and Harold were lost. They had been turned away by Dr. Mudd. They wandered into the Zekiah Swamp, a treacherous labyrinth of quicksand and briars. They were looking for a man named Samuel Cox, a known Confederate agent. Cox found them, but he couldn't take them in. The Union cavalry was patrolling his property. "I can't hide you here," he whispered, "but I know someone who can." He led them to a dense pine thicket a mile away. It was a small patch of woods, utterly impenetrable to horses. "Stay here," Cox said. "Do not move. Do not make a sound. I will send Thomas Jones." Thomas Jones was the foster brother of the swamp. He was a Confederate mail runner who had spent the war smuggling messages across the Potomac River. He was a ghost. Jones found Booth lying on the damp ground, wrapped in a blanket, his leg throbbing. "I can get you across the river to Virginia," Jones said, "but not yet. The river is swarming with gunboats. You have to wait." For 5 days, Booth and Harold lay in the pine thicket. It was a nightmare. It rained constantly. It was freezing cold. They couldn't light a fire because the smoke would give them away. They could hear the Union cavalry riding past the edge of the woods, the jingle of their sabers clearly audible. They were being hunted by thousands, yet they were just 50 feet from the road, invisible. Thomas Jones brought them food and newspapers every day. And this is when the reality broke John Wilkes Booth. The Diary of a Madman. Booth had assumed he would be a hero. He thought the South would cheer him. He thought the North would respect his boldness. He saw himself as Brutus slaying Caesar. He opened the newspapers Jones brought him. He read them by the gray light of the swamp. They called him a coward. They called him a monster. They called him a common cutthroat. Even the Southern newspapers denounced the act. The South didn't want Lincoln dead. They knew his death would bring the wrath of the radical Republicans upon them. Booth had made things worse for the South, not better. Booth took out his small red leather diary. He wrote furiously, his pencil digging into the paper. "I struck for my country and that alone. a country that groaned beneath this tyranny and prayed for this end, and yet now behold the cold hand they extend to me. I am hunted like a dog through swamps, woods, and wet. With every man's hand against me, I am here in despair. And why? For doing what Brutus was honored for? He couldn't understand it. He wasn't a villain. In his own mind, he was the protagonist. Chapter 9. The Doctor in the Dark. April 15, 1865, 4 a.m., Southern Maryland. The pain in Booth's leg was excruciating. Every gallop of the horse sent a spike of agony up his shin. The bone was snapping against the muscle. He needed help. He and David Herold, his accomplice, rode up the long driveway of a farmhouse near Bryantown. They pounded on the door. Dr. Samuel Mudd opened it. He was a country doctor and a Confederate sympathizer. He had met Booth before. Booth had visited the area months earlier looking to buy land, or so he said. "Who is there?" Mudd asked. "Strangers," Herold lied. "My friend fell off his horse. His leg is broken." Mudd let them in. He helped carry Booth to a sofa in the parlor. He didn't ask too many questions. In southern Maryland, you didn't ask questions of men riding at night. Mudd examined the leg. It was a clean fracture of the fibula. He took a knife and cut the tall riding boot off Booth's swollen leg. He fashioned a splint out of wood and pasteboard. Booth gave the name Tyler. He kept his face partially covered with a shawl. He was exhausted, pale, and shivering. Mudd gave them a room upstairs. As the sun rose, Booth slept, unaware that just 30 miles away, the news of the assassination was spreading like a wildfire. Did Mudd know? It is the great debate of history. Mudd later claimed he didn't recognize the famous actor in the dim light, but Booth had shaved his mustache that morning in Mudd's house. And when Mudd went into town later that day to buy supplies, he heard the news: Lincoln is dead. Booth is the killer. When Mudd returned home, he was terrified. He ordered the men to leave. He pointed them toward a swamp. He said, "Go, before the soldiers come." Mudd had saved Booth's leg, but he had doomed himself. For giving aid to the assassin, Dr. Mudd would be sentenced to a prison on the Dry Tortugas. His name would become synonymous with disgrace. Hence the phrase, "His name is Mudd." Chapter 10. The Iron Man. April 16, 1865, Washington, D.C. Edwin Stanton, the Secretary of War, was now the de facto ruler of the United States. With Lincoln dead and Vice President Johnson in shock, Stanton took control. He turned the War Department into a command center. He mobilized the entire Union Army. "I want every bridge watched. I want every road patrolled doubled. I want every boat on the Potomac stopped and searched." He issued a reward poster. It was massive. $100,000, equivalent to over $1.5 million today. "The murderer of our late beloved President Abraham Lincoln is still at large." Stanton was a paranoid man. He believed the assassination was a grand Confederate conspiracy ordered by Jefferson Davis himself. He arrested hundreds of people. Anyone who had ever looked at Booth was thrown in the old Capitol prison. He sent the best detectives in the country, the National Detective Police, NDP, into Maryland. Leading the hunt was Lafayette Baker, a ruthless spy master who operated outside the law. They found the trail quickly. They found the stableman who rented him the horse. They found the guard at the Navy Yard Bridge who let him pass. He went to Surrattsville. Then he went south. The Union cavalry, the 16th New York, thundered into Maryland. They were moving fast. They were angry. If they caught Booth, there would likely be no trial. They would tear him apart. Chapter 11. The Pine Thicket. April 16 to 20. Booth and Harold were lost. They had been turned away by Dr. Mudd. They wandered into the Zacchaeus swamp, a treacherous labyrinth of quicksand and briars. They were looking for a man named Samuel Cox, a known Confederate agent. Cox found them, but he couldn't take them in. The Union cavalry was patrolling his property. "I can't hide you here," Cox whispered, "but I know someone who can." He led them to a dense pine thicket a mile away. It was a small patch of woods, utterly impenetrable to horses. "Stay here," Cox said. "Do not move. Do not make a sound. I will send Thomas Jones." Thomas Jones was the foster brother of the swamp. He was a Confederate mail runner who had spent the war smuggling messages across the Potomac River. He was a ghost. Jones found Booth lying on the damp ground, wrapped in a blanket, his leg throbbing. "I can get you across the river to Virginia, but not yet. The river is swarming with gunboats. You have to wait." For 5 days, Booth and Harold lay in the pine thicket. It was a nightmare. It rained constantly. It was freezing cold. They couldn't light a fire because the smoke would give them away. They could hear the Union cavalry riding past the edge of the woods, the jingle of their sabers clearly audible. They were being hunted by thousands, yet they were just 50 feet from the road, invisible. Thomas Jones brought them food and newspapers every day. And this was when the reality broke John Wilkes Booth. Chapter 12. The Diary of a Madman. Booth had assumed he would be a hero. He thought the South would cheer him. He thought the North would respect his boldness. He saw himself as Brutus slaying Caesar. He opened the newspapers Jones brought him. He read them by the gray light of the swamp. They called him a coward. They called him a monster. They called him a common cutthroat. Even the South newspapers denounced the act. The South didn't want Lincoln dead. They knew his death would bring the wrath of the radical Republicans upon them. Booth had made things worse for the South, not better. Booth took out his small red leather diary. He wrote furiously, his pencil digging into the paper. "I struck for my country, and that alone, a country that groaned beneath this tyranny and prayed for this end, and yet now behold the cold hand they extend to me. I am hunted like a dog through swamps, woods, and wet, with every man's hand against me. I am here in despair, and why? For doing what Brutus was honored for." He couldn't understand it. He wasn't a villain in his own mind. He was the protagonist. Why was the audience booing? Chapter 13. The River of Darkness. April 20, 1865. Night. The cavalry patrols finally thinned out. Thomas Jones gave the signal. "Tonight," Jones said, "the tide is right. The moon is dark." He led Booth, who was now hobbling on crutches, and Harold down to the banks of the Potomac River. He gave them a small flat-bottomed boat. He gave them a compass and a candle. "Keep the candle hidden," Jones warned. "Row for McCoddock Creek on the Virginia side. Mrs. Quessenberry will help you there." Booth offered Jones money. Jones refused. He did it for the cause. Booth and Harold pushed off into the black water. The Potomac is wide here, nearly 2 miles. The current is strong. They rowed, and they rowed. But Harold was not a sailor. In the darkness, disoriented by the wind and the pain, they rowed in the wrong direction. Instead of going straight across to Virginia, they rowed upstream, curving back toward Maryland. They rowed all night. As dawn broke, they saw land. They thought it was Virginia. It wasn't. They had landed at Nanjemoy Creek, Maryland. They were still in the state where every soldier was looking for them. They had to hide for another day in the mud, terrified that a gunboat would spot their boat. Finally, on the night of April 22nd, they tried again. This time, they made it. The keel of their boat scraped the Virginia sand. Booth dragged himself onto the shore. He breathed the air of the Old Dominion. He was safe, he thought. He was in the South. But he was wrong. The South was broken, and the Union cavalry was not stopping at the river.
Chapter 14. The Tobacco Barn. April 24th, 1865. Port Conway, Virginia. Booth and Harold were trying to find Confederate soldiers who would protect them. They found 3 of them, Willie Jett, Ruggles, and Bainbridge. These were Mosby's Rangers, disbanded, but still loyal. Jett looked at the crippled man on the horse. "Who are you?" Jett asked. Booth looked him in the eye. "I am John Wilkes Booth, the slayer of Abraham Lincoln." Jett didn't cheer. He looked nervous. But the code of Southern hospitality held. He agreed to take them to a farm owned by Richard Garrett. "We'll tell Garrett you're a wounded Confederate soldier named James Boyd," Jett said. "He'll take you in." Richard Garrett was a devout, unsuspecting farmer. He took the wounded soldier in. He fed him. He gave him a bed. But the next day, Garrett got suspicious. Why was this soldier terrified every time a dog barked? Why did he hide in the woods when riders passed? Garrett told Booth he couldn't sleep in the house anymore. "You can sleep in the tobacco barn," Garrett said. It was a large, drafty shed used for curing tobacco. It had slats in the walls with gaps between them. On the night of April 25th, Booth and Harold went into the barn. They locked the door from the inside. Booth lay down on the hay. His leg was black and swollen. He was feverish. He clutched his carbine rifle and his revolver. He drifted off to sleep. Chapter 15. The Fire. April 26th, 1865. 2 a.m. The sound of hooves. Dozens of them. The 16th New York Cavalry had found them. They had captured Willie Jett at a hotel in Bowling Green and put a pistol to his head. "Where is he?" they demanded. Jett broke. "He's at the Garrett farm." Now 26 Union troopers surrounded the barn. Lieutenant Edward Dougherty, Detective Everton Conger, and Lieutenant Luther Baker, cousin of the spymaster, led the raid. "Come out," Baker shouted. "We know you're in there." Silence from the barn. "If you don't come out," Baker yelled, "we will set fire to the barn and flush you out like a rat." Inside, Booth looked at Harold. Harold was shaking uncontrollably. "I want to surrender," Harold cried. "I don't want to die." Booth looked at him with contempt. "Go then. You are a coward." Booth shouted to the soldiers, "There is a man here who wants to surrender." Harold stuck his hands through the door. The soldiers dragged him out, tied him to a tree, and interrogated him. "Where is Booth? He's in there," Harold sobbed. "He's got guns." The soldiers turned back to the barn. "Come out, Booth! Surrender!" Booth's voice rang out, clear and theatrical. One last performance. "I have a game leg, but give me 50 yards head start, and I will fight your whole command." "We are not here to fight," Baker replied. "We are here to capture you." "Well, my brave boys, prepare a stretcher for me." Detective Conger had had enough. He went to the back of the barn. He pulled a wisp of hay through a crack in the wall. He struck a match. The dry hay caught instantly. The fire roared up the wall. The barn was illuminated in a brilliant, hellish orange glow. Inside, the soldiers could see Booth. He was standing in the center of the inferno, leaning on a crutch. He held a carbine rifle in one hand and a pistol in the other. He looked like a demon in the firelight. He raised the carbine, looking for a target. Outside, a young sergeant named Boston Corbett was watching through a crack in the wood. Corbett was a religious fanatic who had castrated himself years earlier to avoid the temptation of prostitutes. He claimed God told him what to do. He aimed his Colt revolver through the slat.
He wasn't supposed to shoot. The orders were to take Booth alive. Corbett pulled the trigger.
Chapter 16. The Last Words. April 26, 1865, 3:15 a.m. The crack of Boston Corbett's revolver was louder than the fire. Inside the barn, John Wilkes Booth dropped his weapons. He fell backward. He didn't scream. The bullet had struck him in the neck, severing his spinal cord. He was instantly paralyzed from the neck down. The soldiers rushed into the burning structure. They grabbed the fallen assassin by his arms and legs and dragged him out of the fire, laying him on the grass near the porch of the Garrett farmhouse. The firelight danced on his face. He was conscious. "Kill me," Booth whispered. "Kill me." "We don't want to kill you," Lieutenant Baker said, kneeling beside him. "We want you to get well." They carried him onto the porch. They laid him on a straw mattress. The sun began to rise, casting a pale light on the dying man. The irony was cruel and precise. Booth had shot Lincoln in the head. He was now shot in the neck. Lincoln had lingered for 9 hours. Booth would linger for roughly the same. Lincoln could not speak. Booth could speak, but he could not move. He asked for water, but he couldn't swallow. He asked them to turn him over, but the pain was too intense. As the life drained out of him, the actor had one final scene to play. He looked at the soldiers gathered around him. "Tell my mother," he gasped, "I died for my country." His breathing grew shallow. His face turned gray. He asked them to lift his hands so he could see them. He couldn't move them himself. A soldier lifted Booth's hands. Booth stared at them, the hands that had held the dagger, the hands that had killed a president, the hands that were now limp and powerless. "Useless," he whispered. "Useless." At 7:15 a.m., John Wilkes Booth died. A soldier reached into his pocket and pulled out the small red diary. He opened it to the last entry. It was the manifesto of a man who believed history would vindicate him. History would do no such thing. Chapter 17. The Secret Grave. The government did not want Booth to become a martyr. They didn't want a grave site that rebels could visit and worship. They wrapped his body in a horse blanket and sewed it shut. They threw it onto a wagon and drove it to the Potomac River. It was loaded onto the ironclad monitor USS Montauk. On the deck of the ship, surrounded by the iron turrets, an autopsy was performed. They identified him by a tattoo on his hand, JWB, and by a scar on his neck. Then they made him disappear. In the dead of night, 2 men carried the body into the old penitentiary at the Washington Arsenal. They dug a hole in the dirt floor of a storage room. They lowered the body in. They covered it with dirt. Then, to ensure no one would ever dig it up, they placed a massive stone slab on top of the grave. The door was locked. The key was given to Edwin Stanton. For years, rumors persisted that Booth had escaped, that the body was a fake, that Booth was living in Texas or India. But the government knew. The assassin was rotting under a stone floor in a prison warehouse. Years later, the body was released to the Booth family and buried in an unmarked grave in Baltimore, where it remains today. Chapter 18. The Conspirators. July 6, 1865. The chase was over, but the bloodletting wasn't. 8 conspirators had been captured. David Harold, who was with Booth in the barn. Lewis Powell, who stabbed Secretary Seward. George Atzerodt, who failed to kill the vice president, Mary Surratt, the boarding house owner, and 4 others involved in the kidnapping plot or the escape: Dr. Mudd, Samuel Arnold, Michael O'Loughlin, and Edmund Spangler. They were tried by a military tribunal, not a civilian court. It was swift and brutal. 4 were sentenced to prison, including Dr. Mudd. 4 were sentenced to hang. On a hot July afternoon, 4 gallows were erected in the courtyard of the old Arsenal Penitentiary. Lewis Powell walked to the scaffold with the stoic calm of a soldier. He adjusted the noose himself. George Atzerodt whimpered and shook. "Gentlemen, take care," he cried. "I am going." David Harold looked terrified. And then there was Mary Surratt. She was 42 years old. She was the first woman ever to be executed by the United States federal government. Many believed she would be pardoned at the last second. They held an umbrella over her head to shield her from the sun. "Please don't let me fall," she whispered to the executioner as she was tied up. The signal was given, the props were knocked out. The 4 bodies dropped. They spun slowly in the heat. The war was finally, truly over. Epilogue: The Ghost of the Republic. Abraham Lincoln was buried in Springfield, Illinois. His funeral train traveled 1,600 miles, retracing the route he had taken to Washington 4 years earlier. 7 million Americans, 1/3 of the entire population, came out to watch the train pass. They stood in silence in the rain in Philadelphia. They lit bonfires in Indiana. They wept in Chicago. The assassination changed America. It killed the lenient peace Lincoln had wanted. It ushered in the era of radical Reconstruction, a time of military occupation and bitterness that would leave scars on the South for a century. But it also solidified the Union. The death of the president became the final sacrifice of the Civil War. It bound the nation together in a shared tragedy. Today, if you go to Ford's Theater, you can see the box, you can see the gun, and across the street, in the Peterson House, you can see the bed where he died. The pillow still bears the stain of his blood. John Wilkes Booth wanted to be a hero. He wanted to be Brutus. Instead, he became the first name in a dark lineage of American assassins, men who thought a bullet could kill an idea. He was wrong. The man died, but the Union lived. The end.